She was religious in putting on her seatbelt. Why didn't she put it on that night?
The world still remembers that fateful night in Paris, August 31st, 1997, when Princess Diana's life was tragically cut short. But decades later, new revelations about the crash scene have surfaced, and what investigators uncovered inside her car is chilling. From shocking evidence to haunting details that paint a grim picture, these discoveries shed unsettling light on the final moments of the People's Princess. What did they find that was so surprising? Join us as we uncover the startling findings inside Princess Diana's crash car. The Night of Chaos. In the early hours of August 31st, 1997, a twisted, mangled Mercedes lay crushed beneath the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris. Inside it, the world's most famous woman, Princess Diana, was fighting for her life. The crash shocked the globe, but the questions it left behind have refused to fade. Even more than 20 years later, when investigators finally examined the wreckage, what they discovered wasn't just tragic, it was unsettling, raising questions that still haunt the night of August 31st, 1997. That night had become a perfect storm of chaos. The final hours of Princess Diana's life were unfolding with an eerie, unpredictable intensity inside the Ritz Hotel in Paris. She and her companion, Dodi Fayed, had returned unexpectedly after canceling dinner plans. The reason? A growing swarm of paparazzi outside, their cameras flashing relentlessly. A quiet evening had turned into tension under a harsh glare of lights, whispers, and speculation. Behind the scenes, a new plan was quickly forming. Dodi didn't want another public confrontation. A rushed decision was made: slip out the back through a rear service exit. Meanwhile, two decoy cars would leave from the front, drawing the photographer's attention, while the real getaway vehicle, a black Mercedes S-280, would follow moments later, carrying Diana, Dodi, bodyguard Trevor Rees-Jones, and Ritz security manager Henri Paul at the wheel. But the paparazzi were relentless. As the Mercedes pulled away just after midnight, cameras swung, scooters roared, and the chase began. Witnesses described a chaotic blur of motorcycles weaving dangerously between cars. Diana and Dodi had a brief head start, but it vanished quickly in the rising panic. The Mercedes gained speed, barreling through the streets and heading straight for the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. Instead of taking the expected right turn toward Dodi's nearby apartment, the car surged forward into the tunnel, and in one catastrophic moment, everything changed. The Mercedes slammed violently into the 13th pillar of the tunnel. The crash was brutal and final. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul died instantly. Trevor Rees-Jones was barely alive. Princess Diana, critically injured, was still breathing when emergency responders arrived, but the scene was chaotic. Flashbulbs continued to fire even as doctors struggled to reach her. In the aftermath, the physical wreckage was only part of the story. Confusion reigned. Contradictions piled up. The wreckage of Diana's Mercedes revealed more than just the damage. It revealed a night full of unanswered questions. And the answers, even today, are far from comforting. Why did the driver take a route that avoided the safest exit? Was he drunk, framed, or was there something far more complicated at play? Let's find out. The man behind the wheel. The mystery surrounding Henri Paul, the man behind the wheel on that fateful night, has never stopped raising questions. Henri Paul was not just another driver. He was the deputy head of security at the Ritz Hotel in Paris, a man used to dealing with celebrities, politicians, and high-profile guests. He carried himself with authority, the kind of confidence that came from years of experience. Yet on the night of August 30th, 1997, something seemed out of place. After finishing his official shift around 7 p.m., Paul disappeared. For nearly 3 hours, no one could account for where he went or what he did. That gap in time has become one of the most unsettling mysteries of the case. Then, at 10 p.m., he was unexpectedly called back to the Ritz. Within minutes, he was preparing the very escape plan that would lead Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed into the Pont de l'Alma tunnel and into tragedy. What makes this story even stranger is the evidence that followed. Official blood tests claimed Paul was heavily intoxicated, with an alcohol level more than 3 times the French legal limit. On paper, He should have been far too drunk to drive safely. But the cameras inside the Ritz told a very different story. Surveillance footage showed Paul moving with ease, greeting staff warmly, and even bending down to tie both shoes without stumbling. His speech was clear, his posture steady, his actions precise. He was even seen laughing and joking with colleagues, displaying the alertness of a man fully in control. Trevor Rees-Jones, Princess Diana's bodyguard and the only survivor of the crash, later testified that Paul appeared completely sober. Not once did he suspect Paul had been drinking. The contradictions run deeper. Just weeks after the crash, Lord Stevens, the senior officer leading the official Operation Paget investigation, privately met Henri Paul's parents. According to police records, he reassured them their son would not be portrayed as drunk. But when his final public report was released, the narrative had shifted dramatically. Suddenly, the same Henri Paul was labeled as dangerously intoxicated, a man who would have faced criminal charges if he had lived. If Paul really wasn't drunk, then questions must be asked about the integrity of the blood tests and the reliability of the official account. The missing hours of his evening may hold the answer, whether he was meeting someone, pressured into something, or unknowingly set up. What happened to Henri Paul that night may explain not only his decisions in the tunnel, but also why others might have wanted the world to believe he was drunk. And just when the story couldn't grow more tangled, whispers began to surface about another car, one that was never meant to be there at all. So, what did they find in the car? Let's take a closer look. The shocking discovery. Inside the dark, echoing walls of the Pont d'Alma tunnel, investigators stumbled upon something that didn't quite fit. Among the twisted wreckage of the Mercedes lay fragments that told a different story. Shards of a red tail, light, and faint streaks of white paint. These weren't from Diana's car. They matched another vehicle entirely, a white Fiat Uno. This was no ordinary discovery. The small, unremarkable Fiat did not appear in any official reports. No witnesses came forward saying they saw it clearly. No license plate was ever captured, and yet its presence was undeniable. The Mercedes bore the marks of its contact. Laboratory tests confirmed that the paint of a Fiat Uno had been transferred onto the right side of the luxury car. Something had happened, whether a scrape, a nudge, or deliberate impact, just moments before the crash. That raised a chilling question. Did this mystery car block the Mercedes from leaving the tunnel, or worse, force it directly into the fatal 13th pillar? French police scoured the streets for answers, checking more than 4,600 vehicles, but the elusive Fiat never surfaced. Still, suspicions grew. Mohammed Al-Fayed's investigators believed they had solved the riddle. Their attention turned to James Anderson, a well-known paparazzo with a relentless obsession for Diana and Dodi. He owned a white Fiat Uno. He had followed the couple during their Mediterranean holiday, and, according to multiple accounts, he even boasted of being near the tunnel that fateful night. Not long after, investigators found Anderson's Fiat Uno, but it looked different. The taillight had been replaced. Then came the most haunting twist. In the year 2000, Anderson was found dead in rural France. His body was discovered in a burned-out car, deep within a forest. Authorities quickly ruled it suicide by self-immolation, but doubts spread like wildfire. There was no lighter, no suicide note, and his body was almost completely incinerated. But what was Diana escaping or chasing on that fateful night? Let's take a look at the clothes she chose and the belongings she held close. The ring before the crash. Just a few hours before the tragedy that shook the world, Dodi Fayed slipped quietly into one of Paris's most exclusive jewelry shops, Raphael Raposo, a name that glittered among the city's finest luxury boutiques. He wasn't there by accident. He had a purpose, and it was a deeply personal one. Inside, away from the curious eyes of the public, he chose a ring from the jeweler's famous Dis-moi oui collection, translated into English as "Say Yes to Me." The ring itself was not flamboyant or ostentatious. It wasn't dripping with massive diamonds that screamed for attention. Instead, it was a simple gold band, elegant, refined, and understated, the kind of piece that carried more meaning than sparkle. It was the sort of ring that whispered promises rather than shouted wealth. After selecting it, Dodi arranged for it to be delivered discreetly to the Ritz Hotel, where he and Princess Diana were staying that night. It was immediately locked away in a safety deposit box, kept hidden from the public but full of unspoken meaning. The significance of this ring, however, did not stay hidden for long. Dodi had already shown Diana the brochure earlier, and in the aftermath of the crash, this small piece of jewelry became one of the most talked about objects in the world. And it wasn't just the ring fueling speculation. Whispers grew louder that Diana was pregnant. The rumor mill spun furiously. Paparazzi photographs showed her in a swimsuit during her holiday with Dodi, and some tabloids eagerly circled her midsection, pointing to what they claimed was the beginning of a baby bump. Friends described her as glowing, while others hinted she had been talking about big news that would soon be revealed. For those who wanted to believe, the puzzle pieces seemed to fit neatly together: an engagement ring, a pregnancy, and a love story that would unite Diana with a man far outside the royal mold. But when investigators dug deeper, the hard evidence began to challenge these romantic narratives. Forensic tests were conducted on blood samples recovered from the crash site. Those tests revealed no biological signs of pregnancy whatsoever. In addition, it came to light during the official inquest that Diana had been taking contraceptive pills at the time, a fact confirmed by her doctor and supported by medical records. These details painted a very different picture. Close friends and members of Diana's inner circle later testified as well. They explained that while Diana's relationship with Dodi was passionate and exciting, it was still relatively new. She enjoyed the romance, the spontaneity, and the sense of freedom he brought, but according to them, there had been no serious talks of engagement, let alone of starting a family together. For Diana, who had endured years of intense scrutiny and personal upheaval, the relationship was a joyful escape, not necessarily the foundation for a second marriage. Still, not everyone accepted this conclusion. At the forefront of the opposing view was Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father. A man of immense wealth and influence, Mohammed was convinced that his son and Diana were truly in love and planning to build a life together. He insisted that Diana had been pregnant and that the engagement was real. In his eyes, the tragic crash was no accident at all. He argued that elements within the British establishment, horrified by the idea of a Muslim man fathering the potential step-sibling of a future king, had orchestrated the event to ensure it never happened. The inquest into Diana's death examined these claims thoroughly. Witnesses were questioned, medical records scrutinized, and every piece of available evidence combed through. Lord Stevens, who headed the official British investigation, delivered his findings with clarity. Diana was not pregnant, and she was not engaged. His team's conclusion was rooted in science, testimony, and physical proof recovered from the wreckage. Even with the official findings, the symbolism of the ring refuses to fade. To some, it represents what might have been, a love story cut short before its next chapter could be written. To others, it is simply a piece of jewelry, inflated into legend by the world's desperate need to make sense of a senseless tragedy. And while that ring lay quietly locked away, another force was far from silent. A far more dangerous presence had been circling them all night, one that had nothing to do with love or whispered secrets. It came with flashing bulbs, relentless pursuit, and an insatiable hunger for images. What part did the paparazzi play in the incident? Let's find out. The paparazzi. The role of the paparazzi has always been a controversial subject. On that fateful night in Paris, when the black Mercedes finally came to a halt inside the Alma tunnel, its body crushed, its steel twisted beyond recognition, the photographers were already there. Eyewitnesses, including 2 American tourists riding past in a taxi, later described a haunting and unsettling scene. The tunnel was not just filled with the smell of smoke and burning metal, it was alive with the rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters. Swarms of paparazzi surrounded the wreck, not rushing forward to help, but to capture images. Some climbed on the hood of the ruined car, their shoes scraping against dented metal, while others leaned into shattered glass to get their shots. To bystanders, they did not look like witnesses. They looked like scavengers circling the wounded, vultures feeding on tragedy. Among the first to arrive at the crash site was Dr. Frédéric Mallier, a French physician who happened to be driving by. He had no idea who the victims were at first. All he knew was that there were lives to save. Acting on instinct, he rushed forward, opened the door, and began giving aid to a woman who was critically injured but still breathing. Only later would he realize that the woman he was fighting to keep alive was none other than Princess Diana. He worked quickly, clearing her airway and providing what little help he could until emergency crews arrived. But even in those tense, life-or-death moments, he could not escape the sound of cameras clicking around him. It was shocking, he said later, not because the paparazzi had interfered directly, but because they had simply stood and watched, more interested in capturing photographs than in offering even the smallest assistance. Legally, their actions were murky ground. That night, French police arrested 7 photographers. Some spent the night in holding cells, and a few faced charges for failing to assist accident victims, a serious offense under French law. But attempts to accuse them of something greater, like manslaughter or complicity in the crash, quickly fell apart. Over time, the charges faded, and so did the prospect of any real punishment. Many of the photographs they had taken never saw the light of day. Some were quietly confiscated, others locked away forever. For Trevor Rees-Jones, Diana's bodyguard and the sole survivor of the crash, the photographers were more than just insensitive. They were a barrier, overwhelming and emotionally unbearable. No photographer physically blocked the rescue teams, but their flashing cameras turned the tunnel into something grotesque. Instead of a place where emergency workers could focus on saving lives, it became a stage lit up by relentless flashes, as though Diana's final struggle were part of a film. It was, in his words, an obstruction to dignity itself. And here lay the true horror. Whether or not the paparazzi caused the crash, they undeniably played a role in Diana's last moments. For years, she had spoken openly about the relentless pressure of being pursued by cameras. She had described the loneliness and emotional toll of never escaping the spotlight. On the night she died, in her most vulnerable state, those very cameras were the last things she saw. But the questions about that night did not end with the photographers. They grew larger and stranger as the years passed, reaching far beyond the tunnel. What followed was a tangled mess of investigations, legal missteps, and suspicious delays. Some failures came from the French authorities. Others, more damning, came from the very systems meant to uncover the truth. It would take a full decade before Britain finally launched a formal inquest into the deaths of Princess Diana and Dodi Fayed. 10 years of silence, speculation, and swelling suspicion. By the time the proceedings began, trust had already eroded. 4 coroners had been assigned to the case, only to fall away one by one. 2 resigned under pressure. 1 died before hearings could start, and another was forced to step down after critics argued she lacked the proper experience to manage a jury. To many, this revolving door of officials looked less like an accident of bureaucracy and more like a strategy, an attempt to stall, to delay, perhaps even to bury the truth. When Lord Justice Scott Baker finally took control of the inquest, the public's patience had worn thin. Many people openly wondered whether the delays were deliberate. From the very beginning, this inquest promised to be unlike any other. It was not going to be a polite formality. The coroner presented the jury with a startling list of 20 crucial questions that had to be addressed. These were not vague gestures toward closure. They were sharp, specific, and unsettling. Did Diana ever entertain fear for her life? And if so, why? Let's find out. Diana's Fears and Inquest. In October 1996, Princess Diana wrote a chilling letter to her butler, Paul Burrell. In it, she said her husband was planning an accident, something with her car, a brake failure, and a serious head injury. She felt she was being watched, and she even told her lawyer, Lord Mishcon, that people were plotting against her. These weren't just private fears. They were written down, spoken about, and remembered. At the time, most people brushed them off as stress or imagination. But years later, when her words were read aloud in court, they sounded far too close to what actually happened. Even Lord Mishcon admitted he found it hard to believe. Yet, when he mentioned it to Scotland Yard Commander Jeff, the commander shockingly said he half believed it could be true. That confession only resurfaced during the inquest. The car crash may have been the end, but Diana had long believed someone was setting a trap, and investigators found more shadows the deeper they looked, some with links to intelligence circles. The whispers about secret services only grew louder after her death. Within minutes of the news, Mohammed Al-Fayed, father of Dodi, called it murder, not an accident. He believed Diana's relationship with his son was a threat to the monarchy, and that powerful forces wanted her silenced. Diana herself had said she was being monitored. The inquest revealed claims that her phones were tapped and that MI6 had tracked her movements. Lord Stevens, who led the official Operation Paget investigation, was even granted rare access to MI6 records. He said no evidence of an assassination plot was found, but critics wondered if certain records had simply been erased or never written down. Attention also shifted to Henri Paul, the Ritz's security chief and the driver that night. French intelligence had previously used him in hotel inquiries, leading some to suspect he was more than just an employee. The timeline of medical care became another controversy. After the crash, Diana remained in an ambulance for 1 hour and 43 minutes before reaching an operating table, even though the wreck was only about 3 miles from one of Paris's top trauma hospitals. Instead of going to the nearest facility, doctors followed French protocol by stabilizing her on site before moving her slowly across the city. Emergency officials defended this system, but critics asked why a dying woman wasn't rushed immediately to the closest hospital. Inside the ambulance, Diana went into cardiac arrest, was revived, but her injuries were devastating. By the time surgeons opened her chest, her torn pulmonary vein made survival nearly impossible. The first doctor on the scene, Dr. Frederic Maille, said she looked peaceful, as though asleep, and denied that paparazzi interfered with his work. Outwardly, she seemed unharmed, but the internal damage was beyond repair. Investigators combed the wreckage of the Mercedes for answers. They found fragments of Diana's final night, a broken string of pearls in the back seat. Blood samples later tested to rule out pregnancy, but no diary, no handbag. Mechanics confirmed the brakes, tires, and steering worked fine. There was no evidence of sabotage. Still, many things didn't add up. Critical CCTV cameras were not recording, pointed the wrong way, or were missing entirely. There was no footage of the Fiat Uno that many witnesses claimed to see, no images of the exact crash moment. Adding to the unease, the tunnel was reopened to traffic just hours later, by 10:30 a.m. Cars were driving through before investigators had fully gathered evidence. The scene was scrubbed clean far too quickly. And so, more than 25 years later, Diana's death remains unresolved in the minds of millions. The official conclusion says it was a tragic accident, yet unanswered questions pile up. So, what do you think about the shocking revelation from Diana's crash car? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.